It was supposed to be an evening filled with possibility, but what happened next left an entire restaurant silent and the internet in tears. A young woman, described by witnesses as polite, soft-spoken, and visibly nervous, sat across from her blind date in a cozy downtown cafe. Copyright. It was one of those classic setups, arranged by mutual friends who believed two lonely hearts might find a connection over coffee and casual conversation. But within minutes of meeting her, the man across the table reportedly frowned, checked his phone, and sighed impatiently. What followed was an exchange so uncomfortable that several nearby diners couldn't help but take notice. According to onlookers, the man dressed sharply in a fitted shirt and blazer leaned forward and said something that instantly changed the woman's expression. Her smile faded, her hands fidgeted with the napkin, and her shoulders slumped. Though his exact words weren't entirely audible, one witness later confirmed that he told her she wasn't what he expected and that she looked different from her pictures. Then, almost without hesitation, he stood up, muttered something about having to leave, and walked out of the restaurant, leaving the woman sitting alone, her eyes fixed on the cup of coffee in front of her. The entire exchange lasted less than 10 minutes, but it left a lasting mark on everyone who saw it. One diner described the moment as absolutely heartbreaking. She recalled, "You could tell she was trying so hard to hold it together. She smiled, nodded, and pretended she was fine, but you could see the tears building up. It was awful to watch." Another patron said the man's behavior wasn't just rude, it was cruel. "You don't humiliate someone like that, especially in public," he said. "If you're not interested, fine, but there's a kind way to excuse yourself." He made her feel small, and that's what got to people. As word of the incident spread online, many were quick to express outrage over the way the young woman was treated. But in that same restaurant, something else was unfolding, something that would soon change the tone of the story entirely. Sitting just one table away was a man having dinner with his little daughter. He had watched the entire uncomfortable scene unfold while quietly trying to distract his child with her meal. When the date abruptly ended, and the young woman sat staring at her drink in silence, the father reportedly leaned down to his daughter and whispered something that made her look up. Curious. That private father-daughter exchange would soon lead to one of the most uplifting moments of the night, but at that point, no one knew what was about to happen. Back at the table, the young woman whose name was later revealed as Clara remained seated for several minutes, likely debating whether to leave or to stay a little longer just to save face. Witnesses said she appeared to be blinking away tears while scrolling aimlessly on her phone, pretending to be busy. The server, clearly sympathetic, offered to pack her order to go, but she politely declined, saying she'd be fine. It was a brave front, the kind many people put on after being publicly embarrassed. But beneath that calm exterior was visible pain, the kind that speaks louder than any words. Social media users would later describe the incident as a snapshot of modern dating culture, where appearances are often given more value than personality or kindness. Commentators pointed out how easy it is to forget that behind every profile and every first impression is a real human being, complete with insecurities and hopes. "We live in a world obsessed with filters and first looks," wrote one commenter. "This story hurts because we've all either been that girl or know someone who has." In the hours that followed, posts began circulating online as people shared their disgust at the man's actions. Many questioned why some individuals still believe body type defines worth. Others called it a wake-up call, a reminder that respect should never depend on physical appearance. But amid the criticism, a different tone began to emerge. Admiration, not for the man who left, but for the stranger who would soon step forward. Because while Clara sat there, trying to rebuild her composure, the single father nearby quietly decided that what he'd just witnessed wasn't something he could ignore. He later told a friend that when his daughter asked why the man had been so mean, he felt he couldn't just give her a lecture about kindness, he needed to show her what it looked like. And so, without fanfare, he stood up, took a deep breath, and began walking toward Clara's table. What happened next would turn a moment of public rejection into a powerful message about empathy, and that is where the story truly begins. When the man from the next table approached Clara, the atmosphere in the restaurant shifted almost instantly. Patrons who had just witnessed the cruel rejection now watched in quiet curiosity. The man, later identified by social media users as a single father named Daniel Harper, didn't hesitate or act awkwardly. He walked up calmly, carrying a gentle smile that immediately softened the tension surrounding Clara's table. According to witnesses, his 6-year-old daughter remained seated, watching him with wide eyes, almost as though she instinctively knew her father was about to do something kind. Daniel didn't start the conversation with pity or with the awkward sympathy people often show in such situations. Instead, he began with something simple and human. "Hey," he reportedly said, "I just wanted to tell you that guy who left, he doesn't know what he's missing." Those words alone caught Clara off guard. At first, she smiled politely, perhaps assuming he was trying to be nice out of courtesy, but when she looked up, she noticed sincerity in his expression, the kind that isn't forced or rehearsed. He wasn't trying to comfort the stranger to make himself feel better. He was speaking as someone who had witnessed an injustice and wanted to make it right in the smallest way possible. Several patrons later described how the man pulled out a chair with a respectful pause, asking if she would mind if he joined her for a few minutes. Clara nodded, though still visibly embarrassed. Daniel then explained that his daughter had seen what happened and had asked him, "Daddy, why was that man mean to her?" That innocent question had moved him deeply. He told Clara he didn't want his daughter to grow up believing that someone's worth could ever be measured by appearance. "I told her," he said softly, "that some people can't see real beauty even when it's right in front of them." Those words were overheard by a nearby diner who later shared the story online, and within hours, they were circulating across social media platforms. What started as a quiet act of kindness soon turned into an internet phenomenon. A photo taken by another customer showed Daniel and Clara laughing over coffee, with his daughter smiling at the table next to them. The post's caption read, "She was rejected for being too fat, but he showed his daughter what kindness looks like." It struck a chord with millions of people. Within 24 hours, the story had been shared tens of thousands of times, with commenters describing it as the kind of humanity we need to see more often. Clara later shared that she had initially wanted to leave the restaurant right after the incident but stayed only because she felt too humiliated to stand up and walk past everyone who had witnessed her rejection. "When he came over," she told reporters later, "I didn't know how to react. I thought maybe he felt sorry for me, but the moment he mentioned his daughter, I realized it was something else. He wasn't trying to fix me, he was trying to show her what decency looks like." That brief interaction completely shifted the tone of her evening. Instead of walking out in tears, she found herself laughing, sharing stories, and realizing that one person's cruelty didn't define her worth. Social media users across different platforms began calling Daniel a hero, though he humbly dismissed the label when interviewed later. "I didn't do anything heroic," he said. "I just didn't want my daughter to think that silence is okay when someone is being treated unfairly. I wanted her to see that you can stand up for someone without shouting, without making a scene, just by showing kindness." His words resonated with parents everywhere, sparking thousands of comments about teaching children empathy, confidence, and respect. The story gained momentum as news outlets picked it up. Articles described Daniel as the stranger who turned rejection into redemption, while others praised Clara for her grace and composure in such a painful moment. Online discussions grew, focusing on how body shaming and judgmental dating culture continue to harm people emotionally. One comment that went viral read, "It takes seconds to make someone feel small, but the single act of compassion can undo hours of humiliation." This man didn't just help her, he gave all of us a reminder that empathy still exists. In the days that followed, Clara received countless messages of support from people who said her story gave them courage. Some shared their own experiences of being judged or rejected for their bodies, while others admitted that reading about Daniel's gesture made them reflect on how they treat strangers. "I realized that being kind costs nothing," one commenter wrote, "but it can change someone's entire day, maybe even their life." What made this story stand out wasn't grand gestures or romantic copyright said was authenticity. There were no rehearsed speeches, No viral stunts planned for attention. It was a man, his daughter, and a woman who had just been publicly humiliated. Three ordinary people whose paths crossed in a moment of honesty. What Daniel did wasn't about saving someone, it was about restoring balance, about reminding a stranger and everyone watching that decency still matters. That night, before leaving the restaurant, Clara reportedly thanked Daniel for what he had done. "You didn't just make me feel better," she said quietly. "You made me believe people like you still exist." He smiled and told her that maybe one day, she'd do the same for someone else. And with that, the story that began with rejection turned into one of the most heartwarming tales of compassion the internet had seen in a long time. In the days following the incident, the story of Clara and Daniel spread beyond social media platforms and entered mainstream news cycles, capturing the hearts of millions. What had begun as an uncomfortable moment in a small cafe tilde copyright had turned into a powerful reminder of empathy in action. Across digital spaces, people shared their reflections, tagging friends and family, discussing how a simple gesture could redefine the way we view human decency. In a time when most headlines are filled with conflict, loss, and division, this story offered something refreshingly different, a spark of humanity that seemed to resonate universally. As interviews began to surface, both Clara and Daniel spoke with modesty about what happened. Clara explained that she had agreed to the blind date hoping for nothing more than a pleasant evening and maybe a new friend. "I didn't expect magic," she said in one interview, "but I also didn't expect to be humiliated before my coffee even arrived." Her voice wavered slightly when she described the moment her date walked away, but her tone shifted to warmth when she spoke about Daniel's intervention. "He didn't treat me like I was a victim," she said. "He treated me like a person, like someone worth sitting with, worth talking to, worth being kind to." And that made all the difference. Daniel, meanwhile, seemed slightly overwhelmed by the attention. He told reporters that he had no intention of going viral or being praised for what he believed was a basic act of decency. "I just wanted to show my daughter that kindness is something you do, not something you talk about," he said. "I wanted her to see that being brave doesn't always mean standing up to bullies with anger. Sometimes it means standing beside the person they've hurt." His words struck a chord with parents everywhere, prompting countless discussions about raising children to be compassionate rather than judgmental. Parenting blogs and family-oriented programs soon highlighted his example as a lesson in emotional intelligence and empathy. The cafe tilde copyright where it all happened experienced an unexpected surge of visitors, many wanting to see the place where the story unfolded. The manager said it reminded his staff that ordinary spaces can become the setting for extraordinary moments. "People come here now and talk about that night," he said. "They tell us it gives them hope. It's humbling to realize that something so small could inspire so many." Beyond the initial wave of attention, the story began to spark deeper conversations about body image and respect. Advocates for body positivity praised Clara for handling the situation with dignity. Public figures and influencers joined the discussion, sharing their own experiences with judgment and rejection. One well-known columnist wrote, "What makes this story so moving isn't romance, it's perspective. We live in a culture that constantly tells people to shrink themselves, to change, to fit in." Clara's story reminds us that kindness should never depend on appearance. The internet, often criticized for being a breeding ground for negativity, showed its better side. Comment sections that usually descended into arguments instead filled with words of encouragement and compassion. Strangers defended Clara, praised Daniel, and even shared how the story had made them reach out to someone they hadn't spoken to in years. For once, a viral moment wasn't fueled by outrage, but by hope. As days turned into weeks, Clara admitted that the incident, while painful, had changed her in unexpected ways. She began volunteering with a local organization that promotes self-esteem and confidence among young women. "I realized that if my story could help someone else feel less alone, then maybe it was worth going through that night," she said. Daniel, for his part, continued his quiet life as a devoted father. He didn't seek recognition or sponsorships. He declined interviews that tried to sensationalize his gesture. It wasn't about being a hero, he repeated in one of his last public comments. It was about being human. The story eventually became a symbol of the kind of everyday decency that people long to see more of, the quiet courage to do something kind without expecting anything in return. Commentators observed that its appeal lay not in grand gestures or cinematic romance, but in its simplicity. It reminded people that empathy isn't rare, just often unnoticed. It exists in moments when we choose to see others as they are, rather than how society tells us they should be. Clara's final statement during a local talk captured the essence of what the story had come to represent. That night started with rejection, but it didn't end there, she said. It ended with understanding. I went home feeling like the world was still kind, that there are still people who see beyond what's visible. I think we all need to be reminded of that sometimes. In a world often too busy to notice small acts of goodness, this story lingered because it wasn't just about the blind date gone wrong. It was about what happens when compassion steps in quietly, without expecting applause. It showed that dignity can be restored with a few gentle words, that empathy still has power, and that sometimes, the right person doesn't need to be your date, they just need to be someone kind enough to care. Months after that unforgettable evening in the Café Tilde copyright, the story of Clara and Daniel continued to echo far beyond its viral moment. What began as an emotional tale shared by witnesses on social media had evolved into something much deeper, a quiet movement about kindness, empathy, and the courage to act with compassion in everyday life. The internet's attention had shifted, as it always does, but for many, the story stayed in their hearts, resurfacing whenever discussions about respect and humanity arose. It became a timeless example of how a single act of goodness can change the tone of a conversation and even the direction of a life. Clara often said in interviews that she never expected the world to react the way it did. For weeks after the story spread, she received letters, emails, and messages from strangers all over the world. Some thanked her for sharing her vulnerability, others confessed that they had been through similar experiences of being judged, ridiculed, or dismissed because of how they looked. She said the messages that touched her most were from young people, especially women, who said her story gave them confidence to stop apologizing for existing in their own bodies. It's not just about weight, she explained. It's about dignity, about being treated as a whole person. That's what I learned from all of this. Daniel, on the other hand, became somewhat of a reluctant role model. Although he never sought public recognition, he began receiving invitations to speak at schools and community events about teaching kindness and empathy to children. At first, he hesitated, unsure if he had anything profound to say. But after some reflection, he realized that his story wasn't really about him at all. It was about a lesson his daughter taught him. When she asked why that man was so mean, he said in one speech, "I realized I had to answer with more than words. Children learn by watching us." That night, I just wanted to show her what compassion looks like in real life. His sincerity struck a chord, and soon, parents began sharing his words as reminders that values are taught not through lectures, but through action. The Café Tilde copyright, where everything happened, quietly placed a framed photograph of its interior with a small plaque beneath it that read, "Kindness was served here." Visitors would stop to take photos or sit in what they called Clara's corner. The staff said that since the story broke, they had witnessed countless moments of strangers chatting, comforting one another, or paying for someone else's meal, a ripple effect of empathy that started with one conversation. "It's almost as if that night changed the energy of this place," one employee said. "People come in and talk about kindness now. That's rare." Beyond the immediate impact, the story also found its way into journalism classrooms, psychology discussions, and motivational talks. Educators used it to illustrate how public shaming can deeply affect self-worth and how empathy can act as an antidote to cruelty. Social commentators analyzed why such stories capture global attention, concluding that amid cynicism and digital disconnection, people still crave reminders of genuine humanity. What moved millions about this story, one columnist wrote, wasn't perfection. It was imperfection met with grace, a humiliation met with kindness. It was proof that empathy still exists, quietly, in the corners of ordinary life. For Clara, healing came gradually. The memory of the man who rejected her eventually faded, replaced by the memory of the father and daughter who restored her faith and decency. She began journaling her experiences and eventually started a blog about self-acceptance, which quickly grew in popularity. She wrote candidly about the lessons she learned, about forgiveness, and about learning not to measure self-worth by anyone else's approval. "I used to think rejection meant I wasn't enough," she wrote in one post. "Now I understand it just means I was sitting at the wrong table." Her words resonated widely, gaining thousands of followers who said they found comfort in her strength. Daniel's daughter, now a little older, would later tell her father that she still remembered that night vividly. "You showed me what being brave looks like," she said. It was perhaps the most rewarding outcome for him, not fame, not attention, but the quiet knowledge that his daughter had learned the lesson he had hoped she would carry with her for life. "That's all I ever wanted," he told one interviewer, "for her to grow up in a world where kindness isn't a surprise." Over time, the story faded from the trending pages, as viral moments always do, but its echo remained in countless conversations. People remembered it not because of drama or controversy, but because it reaffirmed something simple and enduring: that compassion matters. It reminded readers that in a world often driven by instant judgments, there is immense power in pausing, in seeing another person fully, and in choosing to be kind even when it's easier to look away. Clara's story may have begun with rejection, but it ended with renewal, not the romantic kind, but the human kind. It became a quiet anthem for anyone who has ever been told they're not enough, and for everyone who believes that a little kindness can still change the world. As one reader commented under the final article that closed the story's coverage, "The best part of this story isn't that it went viral, it's that it made us all want to be a little more like Daniel, and a little braver, like Clara." And perhaps that, in the end, was the most powerful outcome of all.